My name is Anthony House. I work on our public policy team in London, looking after our policy and PR outreach on privacy issues. And I'm happy today to be able to introduce you to Gus Hosein and Simon Davies from Privacy International. If you've Googled Privacy International, you've probably quickly discovered that they're one of the more influential privacy advocacy groups worldwide, and we've had a long and arduous relationship with them. So they're here to share some of their insights from the outside world, from the privacy advocacy world, and to get questions back from you guys. So without further ado, I'll turn it over to them.
Thank you, Anthony, and thank you all for allowing us into the Googleplex to talk with you. This is an honor and a surprise for us. So I'm Simon Davies, and this is Gus Hosein. We're the two sort of key policy and campaigning people in Privacy International. What I wanted to do was talk to you about some problems that we're facing and hope that you're able to help in the solution, as you've helped with the solution on so many problems down the years. We wanted to bring to you a challenge which we believe to be the most important privacy issue of this time and possibly of all times. So we'll tell you about that in a minute. But first, I thought it could be useful, so we're all on the same page, to give you the 120-second briefing on privacy. Okay, so we're going to condense 20 years into 2 minutes here, the entire London School of Economics master's course, you know, in the blink of an eyelid. This is just so you know where we're coming from and what we do and kind of where you guys fit into it. So, first, this isn't a Western issue. There's something like 100 countries that have privacy laws based on 450 known definitions of privacy. So this is why everybody in this room is going to have a different definition of this very unruly concept. In fact, it's quite likely there are about 9 billion of them on the planet. So, you know, we've given up on the idea, the quest of a single definition. 10,000 laws, to the best of our knowledge, in existence. Not all national laws, obviously. They're very often sectoral, they're state, they're provincial, they're to do with specific issues, you know, to do with, let's say, health or consumer rights or whatever. And all of this massive activity, going back decades, is based on 8 principles, all of which are common sense to everyone in this room and everyone watching. And these are the principles of data protection, the principles embedded in federal law in the United States. You know, do the right thing with data. Don't keep it for as long as for longer than you need. Don't disclose it for unintended purposes. Don't do the wrong thing with it, basically. And those 8 principles have steered all of the rest of the privacy realm throughout history. Now, we, in our 20 years, have dealt with an awful lot of issues, a huge number of issues worldwide. I mean, we base ourselves in about 40 countries at the moment. There's the top-level view of privacy. It's basically what happens to you and the society around you. All of the privacy issues, the thousands of them, are to do with personal autonomy, all of our relationships, our culture, our space, our body, and the data that is generated about us and that we generate. But if you break this out, keep breaking it out, there's more and more issues. We've detected more than 1,500 privacy issues that we've worked on the last 20 years alone. 1,500 separate privacy issues, to the point where it drives us nuts. I mean, people say, you know, radio interviews come up and they say, so tell us what's privacy about? And you go, I've got like a minute and a half before the next ad. How do I express the enormity of this subject and its complexity? But there it is. And you can imagine each one of those dots, whether it be identity cards or identity assurance or, you know, an issue concerning crypto, can be magnified and made more complicated depending on the cultural environment around it. So literally thousands of different contexts, thousands of different subjects and tech areas and policy areas. I wanted to quickly, now there was about a 3.5-minute briefing, so sorry about that. The one issue I would like to, that we'd like to focus on is this absolutely crucial one that I talked about. In 1995, we made a decision to investigate the trade of surveillance technology going across to dangerous and non-democratic regimes. We worked with the European Commission and with investigators across the world, and we identified in 1995 240 companies, many of them household names, that were flogging very dangerous surveillance equipment to the likes of Rwanda, Nigeria, Uganda, places that at the time and for the 10 years preceding during the investigation were police states, military states, where people would be hunted down and where people died in their millions. Now, it was made possible because, for example, in Idi Amin's brutal regime, it was Western surveillance technology that propped that up, that propped up the police systems. It was Western technology that allowed the South African apartheid passbook system, the automated passbook system, and all of the awful discrimination and the horrors that followed from that. Every regime you want to mention, through the 70s, through the 80s, and into the 90s, it was Western coders, Western companies that propped those regimes up. The Guatemalan death lists, the automated police death lists. I mean, those were tendered out with the targeting of individuals actually front and center on the tender document. So the people, the companies that were tendering for that police system knew exactly what they were walking into, but they were in it for the profits. In 1990, I recall being in Bangkok for this one and fighting against what was then the military-backed regime. I remember the Smithsonian Institute here giving an award for the brave use of technology to control data systems for giving the Thai government the most comprehensive surveillance system in its history, run by the Home Office, run by the military, and used with the specific intention of tracking down dissenters outside of Bangkok to the north of the country. This just shows you how difficult this problem is. It's permeating the entire world, and the West is making a fortune out of it.
And now, 15 years later, from that report that we wrote, things have grown so damn complicated. And that's actually why privacy is so difficult now. It's grown so much more complicated than these profit-seeking companies trying to spread bad technologies elsewhere. So everybody knows about the Iran protests and the clampdown that occurred after the elections. And some of you may know that the Wall Street Journal had a set of articles that exposed Nokia Siemens for having sold the telecommunications kit to the Iranian government, because the Iranian telecommunications company is actually owned by the military in Iran. And this telecommunications kit, to the Wall Street Journal's surprise, had backdoors built in so that the government can get access to the communications of the opposition movement, anybody who was organizing to oppose the government at the time. And they were eventually harassed and tracked down, and many of them were jailed, and subsequent other bad things happened. And so the Wall Street Journal was very offended that how dare a European company help in the trade of these bad surveillance technologies. And so when the media came to us, surprisingly, we had to defend Nokia Siemens. First, everybody got it wrong, thought it was Nokia. No, it was actually Nokia Siemens. We had to defend them because it wasn't entirely their fault. The reason they were building these backdoors into technology was actually because of the Clinton administration, where in 1994, the Clinton administration offered the telecommunications industry in this country $500 million to build backdoors into digital telecommunications technologies under the regime of CALIA, Communications Assistance for Law Enforcement Act. This policy was slightly of some concern to the telecommunications industry in the US, because they were saying, well, look, this is going to cost us, and our European partners don't have to worry about that. So the clever Clinton administration traveled to Europe and convinced the European Telecommunications Standards Institute to make this a standard within all telecommunications kit across Europe. And when we opposed this, we were told, how dare you oppose the needs of democratic states to gain access to the communications of its citizenry to protect them from child pornography, from drug barons, and so on. They didn't really consider terrorism back then. So then, it's no surprise that 15 years later, every telecommunications company on Earth, when they sell telephony technology, have to build these backdoors in. So that's why Nokia Siemens got burned in Iran, because they had to sell that technology, because all the technology has that in it. So that was a year and a half ago. And some of you may have followed the news over the past few weeks. This is being reviewed entirely by the Obama administration. And because back in 1994, 1995, when CALEA was passed in this country, one thing that the government had to step back on was information services. And that was what we called the internet back then. A number of people, ourselves included, said, look, if you require backdoors into this burgeoning internet industry, you will kill it. And so the Clinton administration agreed, yes, the law will specifically exclude internet services or information services. And that's what Obama wants to review now. Why is it, and AT&T is fair to ask this, why is it we must build backdoors into our telecommunications systems when Skype and Google and other companies do not? So now we're fighting the fight in a completely different way, because we can't now go back on principle and say, no, maybe the state shouldn't have access to communications of all of its citizenry, because we lost that fight in 1994, and it ended up with people actually getting killed.
So here's an interesting trend that we noticed. Go back to 1995 to this report that we did on the surveillance trade. What you were looking at there were bolt-on solutions for governments. You know, obviously, some of it remains bolt-on, like traditional military spying equipment. But what we found as we moved into the 2000s were that a lot of these 240 companies were shifting their energy toward consulting with the main telco providers and network providers and ISPs in these countries, these developing countries, these military regimes, so that they could engineer privacy from the core of the system. What many of you will remember as surveillance by design. And CALEA is a classic example of that. So this was one of the biggest problems we faced. But on the fringes, there was still a multi-billion dollar industry of these companies either going into such regimes, such countries, and scaring the life out of them, or, as they would say, presenting them with opportunities to enhance the stability of the regime. This is, of course, is how they win the contracts for the surveillance kit. But we were in, to give you an example, we were in Africa, in Ethiopia, working with the United Nations, with the UNHCR last year. And our job was to go around the camps and to find out what was happening with security of the refugee camps and identity systems. And there's a charming picture here somewhere, Gus, of, oh, there we are. Well, you see, not everybody's, she's not smiling, believe me. She thinks that fingerprint scanner is red hot. So she was screaming, little girl here. The children don't like this, but all of the most vulnerable people in the world are face scanned, well, fingerprinted, photographed, documented. And of course, it's Western technology that plays into the hands of regimes that don't know how to use it or will exploit this information for the, you know, for unintended purposes. So, for example, it's one thing to say, yeah, we should collect all of this information on all of these people because, let's face it, they don't care about their privacy anyway, or so goes the myth. But what we discovered was, for example, there's, I don't know if any of you have heard of the Karen. The Karen people in Asia, in Malaysia, are hunted down by the government for a bounty and resold back to their family at the border, effectively kidnapped. These people are on the run. I remember we went to a meeting in a secret location of the Karen refugees while we were over there as part of the UN mission. What we discovered was that the trust in computer systems was so low, it was so degraded, and the risk was so high because basically files, electronic files, are just bought and sold, traded, handed over by the authorities to the host government, Malaysia, that will then use it against the refugees. That what they have is a book. They have a book with everyone's names and details on it. This book is so valuable that its whereabouts is known to only 2 of the Karen elders who would die rather than disclose its whereabouts. That's what the data means to the Karen. What it means to the people who buy and sell the data, who buy and sell the machines to keep the data and hand it over, is, oh, here's just a few megs of stuff. You might find it useful. The Karen would die for it. That's how crucial. Their entire survival depends on the secrecy of that one little book. So that's why data in these countries is so crucial. People die as a result of this massive accumulation, not just the accumulation of this data, but its magnification, its extension, its duplication. The communication of this data across borders is causing lives lost. It's causing genocide. And we knew this back from the 1970s. And why are we here in the most powerful tech company in the world, all of these years later, still talking about this? Nothing has been done. There are no guidelines. There are no standards. Those that exist, like export controls, are circumvented routinely on an hourly basis.
The most recent work we've been doing that's similar to this is we're working on medical informatics in developing countries. I don't know if you know, but of course in the United States there's $17 billion being invested in medical informatics, and there's some great opportunities for advancement. But I would say there's an equivalent amount of money being invested in Africa and Southeast Asia in introducing medical records databases and introducing mobile phones to aid workers so they can collect medical information and share it with other people. And the current situation is that it's in dire need of improvement, because right now you have access databases everywhere, and you have researchers, particularly from outside of Africa and Southeast Asia, trading in the medical information of people, because they're doing God's work. They're there to save people's lives, to cure people, to identify diseases and all of that. So they don't think that these to put it brutally, the savages they're treating care about these issues of privacy and security. So I actually presented at a conference in Cape Town recently where, and you have to understand, we present to law enforcement, national security conferences all the time. And I had never seen a more antagonistic audience than when I was presenting to a bunch of people working on medical informatics. Because again, they're doing God's work. How dare we raise the issue of consent? Because the savages they're treating, they don't care about these things. But when you talk to the actual doctors who are working in the field, the doctors in Haiti, the Haitian doctors in Haiti, the Nigerian doctors in Nigeria, the doctors in Ethiopia, when you actually speak to these people, they know what privacy is, and they know what their patients expect when it comes to privacy. But the chasm between the understanding of privacy by the people who are being affected versus those who are funding the deployment of these technologies is immense, and we're having a hell of a time breaching these. And it's amazing. 20 years later, we're still having these debates. So much so, like, we often get in a debate about whether privacy is a Western value. These coders that we were working with were saying security is a Western value. Data security is a Western value. Why should we secure any of this information? I'm not even talking about privacy, just securing it. So I remember one of the best received presentations was after mine, where everybody beat up on me, was a guy who was developing a medical records management system on an Android phone, because the use of mobile phones in the field is immense, and the opportunity is even larger. And here he is with real patient data, showing it on a slide, showing this patient's got this patient's got HIV, this patient is in consultation for pregnancy issues, showing this data real time. And I asked this stupid question, well, what about the security of the device? And it was the classic answer we got in the 1990s from the Microsofts of the world. We're just building it for now. We'll sort this stuff out later. We'll sort it out later when these mobile phones are all across Africa containing all this sensitive information. And all the people building this just don't see the concern, while the people on the ground do see the potential for damage.
Yeah, and I think, see, this is so strange, because when people think of the privacy issue, of course, the stuff in the headlines is all about social networking or cool stuff at Google. You know, as in the 1990s, it was all about crypto, and it was about caller line identification, and you know, so each, you know, there's a kind of characterization of this issue across the generations. But kind of in a way, 9/10 of the world has been left out of this, because yeah, these issues that we're talking about, you know, when you know, let's say we're visiting here, and we are talking about border security with DHS, or we're, you know, advanced biometrics systems, if that's not an oxymoron. We do talk about these issues, and we're finding that increasingly they are, again, a life and death issue in 9/10 of the world. But those 9/10 of the world have been forgotten. Meanwhile, you know, there's 1 million coders out there in Turkmenistan, in Russia, in China, in Nepal and India and Pakistan that are pushing the code out, that are trying to get involved in this stuff. We were even talking to them in refugee camps. These are people who want to take part in the world, and they're going to do it, whether they do it for good or whether they do it for evil. And this is the challenge. And this is why we need you guys. We really do. And we're reaching out across the world for partners to try and engage this huge population of emerging engineers, of coders, who want to get involved in the 21st century, who want to improve their lives and who want to make a difference to the world. We want to make sure that there is leadership and that there's an ethical compass, that they understand the gravity of what they are doing for the planet, for good or evil. And it's very difficult.
So let's finally have a heart-to-heart, because if you've done any research on us, you understand that we've had some friction between us and Google over the years. And we want you to understand why it is we do the things we do, and sometimes we have these fights over principle, because sometimes principle is all we have. Sometimes some of the things you do, some of the things you say, and I'm not saying Google, I'm saying the companies, the industry, some of the things you say makes our lives difficult. We do a lot of work in developing countries, particularly in Asia right now, where we're trying to do capacity building to help NGOs, journalists, and other people and lawyers to understand this right to privacy and build it in within their legal systems. Because most of these countries have constitutional protections that say, yes, you have the right to privacy, but there's nothing that explains what that actually means. So we're trying to build this up. And it's surprising that no matter where we travel in the world, we get these responses from policymakers that sound a lot like the responses we get from industry leaders in the US. Privacy is a Western value. Privacy is a social norm that's changing. Privacy is from the 1990s. We need to deal with new things. Young people don't care about privacy. These same statements we hear from leaders of companies in the United States, word for word, are the exact same statements we get from policymakers. Policymakers who've been briefed before we got there. We know who's briefing them. There's a finite number of people who are traveling around the world for US industry briefing against privacy laws. And it drives us nuts, because it makes it difficult. And I understand we can have philosophical differences about how you should regulate industry. But when we're not regulating industry, while you're fighting against the regulation of internet services in other countries, you're making it difficult for us to call for a comprehensive privacy regime to make sure the government may not enter people's homes, to make sure the government may not fingerprint people unless there's due cause, to make sure the government cannot do certain things. And so one of the best examples of this principle being interfered with was Gmail. Back in 2004, we ran a campaign to educate people about the concerns around Gmail and the keyword advertising within Gmail. For what it's worth, we'd been taking on the Bush administration for quite some time, right? By then, we got more hate mail for going after Gmail than we did for going after the Bush administration. People didn't understand why would we insult Google? Why would we question their motives? But for us, it was an issue of principle. You were taking this thing that was a communication, that legally is sacrosanct, that is mentioned in constitutions around the world as something that may not be interfered with. And you were interfering with it. And we understand you were doing it with great care. We understand. We know you weren't looking for keywords to report to the government. But when governments want to start interfering with emails to find keywords, what's the first example they use? Gmail does it, so why are you concerned? That's exactly what we had to deal with when the UK government 2 years ago wanted to do something called the Internet Modernization Program, which was essentially installing DPI technology in every ISP in the United Kingdom to have all the traffic data reported immediately on a real-time basis to GCHQ, the equivalent of the NSA. And we opposed this, and eventually, fortunately, we won. But one of the prevailing arguments from the government was people are fine with Gmail. They're fine with their information being interfered with in an email. Why can't we do it in a Facebook session? Why can't we do it in a Skype session? Why can't we do it in every other internet application today? And it's hard to fight that. Similarly, when it comes to the Facebook view of the world and Zuckerberg's famous statement about social values and everybody who speaks as if social networking is this new thing, and how anybody who dares to use social networking has given up all of his or her rights to privacy. About 3 years ago, the French government wanted to introduce a database and a data mining application, the database of all children in France. And a data mining app that would basically use all this personal information on every single child in France to identify potential criminals. By the age 13, they want to identify which child, not group of children, but which child will become a criminal. And when campaigners oppose the government on this, saying, you can't do this, the children have a right to privacy, this is wrong, the French justice minister responded, all these kids use Facebook, so they don't care about privacy. We need to be able to hit back against stupid statements like that, and we do. But it isn't easy when these statements are made by the leaders, when this view that innovation must prevail and all regulation must be left behind, that damages our opportunities to work in these other countries and push these issues forward.
So that's it. Work with us. I don't know how. I don't know whether you believe in karma or just putting some energy into this, but one way or the other, we know that there is no time left. We can't play around anymore on this. You know, it was just the reason why we're kind of so fixed on this now is because we've done so much traveling to these countries in the last year, and it is what Gus says is bang on the money. We simply can't make an argument to governments, to companies. Companies are saying, oh, it's culturally relative. You know, they don't care about privacy in India. Yes, they do. You know, Muslims don't care about privacy. These are lies, and we are dealing with them. They are lies. These people know better. They are spreading a disease of untruths across the world, which is making it impossible to entrench rights and security for people in these countries. So, how would you help in trying to improve things, 8,000 miles away in the middle of a dust bowl? It's going to be a tough one. But what I would say is we need ideas, we need thoughts. How do we create a more ethical environment, an environment based on truth and on the right perception? I know that the people in this room and the people in this compound are capable. They already have changed the world, and this is a problem. They could lick like that. And I know this to be true. We know it to be true. The power that's in this area is extraordinary. So please, if you get strange memos that are sort of out there on the Tupperware, pyramid scheme saying, please, could you give us a hand? We need your ideas. We need your input. Give it a second thought, because we think this is the most important issue of this century for privacy. Thank you.